Look up. See the tapestry of the night sky. For generations, we've yearned for a sign, a distant echo from another intelligence, a reassurance that we weren't just shouting into the void. And the truth, we aren't alone, not even close. Faint whispers, ancient broadcasts, the ghost signals of civilizations that once bloomed like cosmic wildflowers. They're all around us. But listen closer, past the static, and you might hear another sound. The soft, insistent grating of a lock. Because while we share this grand, silent stage with 1,000 vibrant species, we're all actors trapped backstage. We see the light under the door, hear the distant, muffled applause, but the exit, it's sealed. This isn't just about the Fermi Paradox anymore. It's about the bars we didn't even know were there, and the chilling realization that alone isn't the problem. Stuck is. The morning light, thin and colorless, bled through the apartment's high window, painting weak stripes across the scarred synthetic floor. Dr. Eris Thorne did not stir immediately. He lay, still cocooned in the worn embrace of his duvet, listening to the city outside. It was not a roar, as it once might have been, but a muted, continuous thrum, a sound that spoke of endless, quiet turning. Beneath it, always, was the whisper. It was not audible in the conventional sense, not through the windows or the walls, but it lived in the air, an electromagnetic ghost known simply as the echo. Eris pulled himself upright, the stale, recycled air in his small room, doing little to clear the film of sleep from his tongue. He swung his legs over the side of the bed, his bare feet meeting the cool, smooth surface of the floor. His reflection, in the darkened window, showed a man whose features were sharp, but softened by exhaustion, eyes that held a persistent, weary question. He was 42, though the lines etched around his eyes sometimes told a story of 100 more years of quiet waiting. The small kitchen, barely a nook, offered the bitter comfort of instant coffee. The rehydrated grounds swirled in the chipped ceramic mug, dark as the pre-dawn sky over the North Sea. He picked up a piece of yesterday's toast, its edges curled like parchment, and chewed without tasting. His compad buzzed softly on the counter, displaying the ubiquitous public data feeds. Forecast. Another mild, overcast day. Traffic. Negligible. And there, always, a small, elegant waveform undulating silently in the corner of the screen. The day's featured echo fragment. Today's was particularly complex, a fractal bloom of impossible geometries that had been broadcast from the Eridani sector for the past 3 cycles. The sheer intricacy was a language in itself, just one that humanity had never learned to speak. He dressed in his usual uniform, practical trousers, a collared shirt, and a jacket that felt like a second skin, worn soft from countless hours spent hunched over console. As he stepped out into the building's common corridor, the pervasive hum of the city swelled slightly. The echo was stronger here, filtering through the public address system, woven into the ambient music that played softly. A constant, subliminal reminder. He caught sight of an elderly woman across the hall, tending to a pot of wilting hydrangeas. Her gaze, like many others, was often directed upwards, not with hope, but with a settled, almost ancestral wistfulness. The elevator descended with a gentle sigh. Down in the street, the world unfolded in muted tones of gray and muted green. Rain had fallen overnight, leaving puddles that reflected the somber sky, and a metallic tang hung in the air, mixed with the damp scent of concrete. Automated transport shuttles glided silently along designated lanes, their bioluminescent markers glowing softly in the perpetual twilight of this heavily light-polluted city. Few people walked, Most preferred the quiet anonymity of the public transport grid. Those who did walk moved with a purpose, heads down, shoulders hunched, as if perpetually braced against a cool, unseen wind. Public screens displayed more than just news and entertainment. They were also dedicated canvases for the echo, showing intricate signal patterns, mathematical analyses, and hypothetical interpretations. No one paused to stare anymore. It was just part of the scenery, like the ubiquitous gray steel architecture. A constant gentle pressure on the collective consciousness. Aris boarded his usual shuttle, finding a seat by the window. His commute took him past the old data farm fields, now reclaimed and repurposed into vertical hydroponic gardens, their neon-lit tiers a splash of alien color in the urban landscape. He watched a mother guiding her child, whose hand grasped a small, worn toy, a plush alien creature with too many eyes, a comforting symbol of a universe that remained forever out of reach. His destination was Sector Alpha 7, a sprawling complex that housed the Xenolinguistic Institute. The building was a fortress of reinforced Dura steel and quantum-shielded glass, a deliberate monument to humanity's unyielding, yet often fruitless, quest. Inside, the air hummed with a different kind of energy. The whisper of cooling fans, the quiet chatter of keyboards, the occasional chime of a successful data transfer. His office, tucked away on the 27th floor, was small and Spartan, dominated by a holographic workstation and a floor-to-ceiling viewport that looked out onto the sprawling city. On his desk, a single wilting orchid fought bravely against the dry, regulated air. He logged into his primary terminal, the screen flaring to life with the familiar cascade of untranslated alien signals. Millennia of broadcast data, compressed, categorized, analyzed, yet stubbornly, profoundly silent. He ran a new probabilistic algorithm, a neural network designed to find patterns too subtle for the human mind, too complex for current statistical models. The algorithm churned, processing the latest stream from a binary star system designated Whisperwind. Hours bled into one another. He adjusted parameters, cross-referenced spectroscopic data, parsed waveform harmonics. The echo from Whisperwind was an intricate sonic sculpture, vast and deliberate, broadcasting a series of mathematical prime sequences, then shifting into something else entirely. A sequence of resonant frequencies that seemed to map an unknown kind of emotional state. It was like trying to understand a symphony by examining the individual vibrations of a violin string without ever having heard music. Frustration, a dull ache that always resided behind his sternum, began to prickle. He knew the data. He understood the physics. He could describe the mathematical elegance of their communication. But he could not understand their intent, their meaning. He imagined the beings on Whisperwind, perhaps long gone, perhaps still there, sending their beautiful, unknowable message into the cosmic dark. Were they speaking, or singing, or merely documenting their own existence for an audience that never materialized? A new sequence popped up on his screen, a momentary deviation in Whisperwind's broadcast. His heart gave a small, unbidden thump. It was a shift, infinitesimally small, a stutter in the elegant flow of primes and frequencies. He leaned closer, his breath fogging the cool surface of the console. Could it be a grammatical marker? A pause? A question? He isolated the fragment, amplifying it, running it through every xenolinguistic filter known to humanity. The intricate patterns resolved themselves, then fragmented again, like mist catching the light, then dissipating. It was a complex sound, rich with harmonics, but utterly alien. It resonated with a profound, almost heartbreaking beauty, a sound that seemed to reach across the vast gulfs of space and time. But It remained untranslatable. It was just another layer of the echo, another whisper from an empty room. Eris felt a familiar exhaustion wash over him, heavier than the morning sleep deprivation. He slumped back in his chair, running a hand over his face. His fingertips felt the rough stubble of his unshaven jaw, the tired hollows beneath his eyes. The sheer, crushing weight of humanity's shared cosmic isolation pressed down on him, not as a theoretical concept, but as a palpable, aching presence in the room. He glanced out the viewport, the city lights beginning to prickle into existence against the deepening gray of the evening sky. Each light was a small, fragile beacon, a testament to human persistence. But above them stretched the vast, indifferent expanse, shimmering with the untranslatable secrets of a universe teeming with life, yet silent to their pleas. The truth, the one that gnawed at humanity's soul, wasn't that they were alone. It was that they were stuck here, listening, forever separated by an invisible, unyielding wall. He reached for the cold ceramic mug, taking another sip of coffee that had long since gone lukewarm, the bitter taste a perfect counterpoint to the quiet despair in his heart. The hum of the servers was Eris's lullaby, a constant, low thrum beneath the thin membrane of his consciousness. Dust motes danced in the pale, artificial light that spilled from the observation screens, making miniature galaxies of the air itself. He nursed a mug of lukewarm, bitter coffee, the ceramic still warm against his chilled fingers as he stared at the spectral graphs before him. Outside, beyond the triple-reinforced walls of the Deep Earth Observatory, the night was a silent, inky canvas indifferent to the fragile hopes held within. He wore the same worn jumper he'd had on for 3 days, the scent of stale coffee and ozone clinging to the wool. This was his world, a tireless vigil for something that seemed determined to remain hidden. "Anything, Kale," Eris murmured, not taking his eyes from the shimmering patterns of ancient light. Kale, perched on a stool before a larger console, barely looked up. "Just the usual cosmic background noise, Professor. A beautiful, chaotic symphony of nothing much at all." Kale was young, his enthusiasm a fragile counterpoint to Eris's entrenched weariness. He'd joined the team 6 months ago, still bright-eyed and eager, unburdened by the cumulative disappointment of a decade. Lena, however, was another matter. Dr. Lena Petrova, a woman whose mind was a steel trap of logic and whose coffee was always impossibly strong, sat across the room. She was meticulously calibrating a new set of graviton sensors, her brow furrowed in concentration. The soft click of her tools punctuated the server's thrum. "Patience, Kale," she advised, her voice a low murmur that somehow carried an edge of steel. "The universe doesn't perform on demand." Lena glanced at Eris, a knowing, almost pitying look in her eyes. They both knew the silent truth. The universe had been performing for billions of years, and had yet to include a chorus from anyone else. Eris simply nodded, taking another swallow of the cooling coffee. It tasted like ash. For months, years even, their team at the Solitude Project had been sifting through the galactic quadrant's most primordial echoes. They hunted for the subtlest ripples in space-time, the faint, nearly imperceptible ghost signals that might betray the presence of truly ancient civilizations. Not radio waves. Those were too transient, too easily lost. They sought anomalies in the cosmic microwave background, CMB. The afterglow of the Big Bang and distortions in gravitational wave patterns, the universe's most fundamental tremors. If anything truly advanced had ever existed, had ever done anything on a galactic scale, It would have left a mark on these. And for a decade, they had found nothing but nature's own sprawling artistry. Then, Cale stiffened. His fingers paused mid-air above the holographic interface. "Professor Lena, I'm getting something strange here." His voice was hushed, losing its usual youthful bounce, replaced by a thread of something else. Curiosity, perhaps, but also a dawning unease. Aris pushed himself from his seat, the old chair groaning in protest, and crossed the short distance to Cale's console. Lena stopped her calibrations, her head cocked, her gaze sharp. "Define strange, Cale," she said, her voice tight with professional skepticism. On the screen, a segment of the CM data, usually a smooth, almost homogeneous ripple of thermal energy, showed a faint, almost imperceptible jitter. It was too regular to be noise, too patterned to be natural interference. "See here?" Cale pointed, his finger trembling slightly as he highlighted a section. "It's a micro-oscillation. Barely within detection limits, but it's periodic." Aris leaned closer, his breath catching in his throat. He'd seen countless anomalies, flickering ghosts that vanished under closer scrutiny. But this felt different. This felt insistent. "Run a spectral analysis," Aris instructed, his voice low, steady, concealing the tremor of hope and dread stirring within him. Cale's fingers flew across the interface. The data crunched. The processor fans whirred louder, a sudden anxious symphony in the quiet lab. A new graph bloomed, showing a distinct, almost rhythmic pulse. It wasn't random static. It was a heartbeat, faint, but undeniably there. Lena was beside them now, her posture rigid, her eyes narrowed. She wasn't dismissing it. That was the first red flag. "Overlay the last 3 cycles," she commanded, her voice devoid of emotion, a shield against belief. Cale complied. The subtle pulse aligned perfectly, across days of data. A chill ran down Aris's spine, a cold premonition unlike any he had ever known. "It's not random. It's not random. It's engineered," Aris whispered, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. He looked at Lena, whose face was a mask of careful neutrality, but her knuckles were white where she gripped the edge of the console. They spent the next 6 hours in a frantic, almost silent ballet of analysis. They cross-referenced with every known astrophysical phenomenon, every terrestrial interference, every natural cosmic event imaginable. They pushed the system's processing power to its limits, their screens awash with diagrams and equations. They found similar, equally faint, periodic distortions in the gravitational wave data, echoes of the CMB anomalies, but translated into the fabric of spacetime itself. It was like finding 2 separate fingerprints that belonged to the same colossal hand. The patterns weren't merely periodic. They demonstrated an almost impossible, intricate symmetry, not the beautiful chaos of stellar nebulae, nor the brutal elegance of black holes. This was the precise, deliberate architecture of something made. The sheer energy required to produce something like this, across such a vast expanse of the CN. Lena breathed, the words barely audible. "It would dwarf any civilization we've ever conceived." Her voice was tight, her disbelief warring with the undeniable evidence. Aris pulled up a holographic projection of their galactic quadrant, a shimmering cloud of stars and gas. He zoomed in, then out, the scale of the cosmos humbling and terrifying. "It's not a signal, Lena," Aris said, his voice flat, hollow. The soft, mournful note of his previous hope had been utterly extinguished. "It's a structure." Kale let out a small, choked sound, his face pale, his youthful exuberance utterly evaporated. "Ah, structure," he repeated, the word alien and terrifying. Eris pointed to the regions where the distortions were strongest, where the unnatural symmetry was most pronounced. They formed a vast, almost seamless boundary, tracing an impossible perimeter around their entire quadrant. It wasn't a wall in the traditional sense, not something visible to the naked eye, but an energetic perturbation. A subtle, yet undeniably artificial, influence on the very fabric of reality itself. It was a barrier, an enclosure. Lena stepped back from the console, her movements stiff, as if she were made of glass. Her eyes, usually so sharp and analytical, were wide with a profound, desolate understanding. The air in the lab grew heavy, thick with unspoken dread. The initial joy, the sheer, unimaginable thrill of confirming extraterrestrial intelligence, never came. Instead, a suffocating silence descended, colder than any vacuum of space. Eris looked from the glowing projection to his team, their faces etched with a shared, terrible epiphany. They had spent their lives searching for others, for a sign of kinship in the vast, indifferent dark, and now they had found it. Not a friendly wave, not an outstretched hand, but the cold, unyielding bars of a cage. "We weren't alone," Aris whispered, his voice cracking, the words tasting of ashes and bitter, unshed tears. "We were just sealed in." The thought hung in the air, a cosmic prison sentence pronounced in the silent, star-dusted courtroom of their own discovery. The universe had finally answered their call, not with a chorus, but with the soft, insidious grating of a lock turning. Generations ago, on a door they never knew existed. And they were on the inside. The anomaly shimmered like a bruised phantom against the star-dusted velvet of the void. It wasn't a star, no fiery core betraying its presence. It wasn't a nebula, no diffuse cloud spreading its cosmic dust. It was a repeating pulse, a faint, almost imperceptible tremor in the fabric of space-time, a rhythmic hum that had taken them years to isolate from the relentless galactic static. "Still there," Iris whispered, the words catching in her throat, a dry taste of recycled air. Her gaze remained fixed on the projection, her brow furrowed in concentration. Ilara, her second in command, a woman whose graying temples were a testament to countless lost nights staring at similar readouts, nodded slowly. Her fingers, calloused from a lifetime of console work, danced over the interface, amplifying the signal again. A soft, insistent thrum-thrum filled the quiet bridge, vibrating in Iris' bones more than her ears. It was a song of absence, a heartbeat in the void where there should have been only silence, a subtle drumbeat from the forbidden lands. For generations, humanity had interpreted the galactic silence as an empty stage, or perhaps a stage where they were the sole, bewildered performers, actors trapped in an endless, dark rehearsal. Then came the whispers, the ghost signals, the undeniable proof that they were not alone. But those signals, like ancient radio waves, struggling against atmospheric interference, always faded into unintelligible static at a certain cosmic boundary. They called it the veil, a theoretical membrane beyond which no coherent signal, no probe, no manned mission had ever returned, leaving behind only unanswered prayers and forgotten hopes. Until now, this pulse, this faint, repeating anomaly, seemed to originate from beyond the veil, a soft knock on a locked door. It was a chink in the cosmic armor, an accidental ripple from something immense and unseen, or perhaps a deliberate invitation. Eris, Ilara murmured, her voice tight with a fragile, almost fearful hope. The energy signature, it's unlike anything we've ever catalogued. It's impossible by our current understanding of physics. Eris leaned closer, her reflection superimposed on the shimmering anomaly. A ghost, superimposed on a ghost. She saw a flicker of her own exhaustion there, the dark circles under her eyes, the worry lines etched around her mouth that had deepened with every failed experiment. But also a fierce, almost desperate glint of resolve, a hunger for truth that outweighed all fear. "It's an echo," Eris said, her voice a low thrum. "Barely above a whisper. An echo of a collision, maybe, or a struggle. Or perhaps," she paused, her gaze fixed on the haunting rhythm, a door opening, just a crack. Months blurred into a relentless cycle of simulations, frantic late-night debates, and the acrid smell of ozone from failed experimental drives. The concept was audacious, bordering on pure madness, even for a species driven by desperation. A speculative propulsion system, designed not for conventional speed, but for rupture, for a momentary, violent tearing. It wasn't about gracefully pushing through space-time, but about violently tearing a seam in its very fabric, a localized, controlled tear. Dr. Kalin, the lead theoretical physicist, a man whose reputation was built on caution and empirical evidence, had initially dismissed it as wishful thinking, bordering on magical thinking, Commander, utterly divorced from reality. But the anomaly persisted, a siren song from beyond the known, demanding an answer. And Eris, with her unwavering conviction, her almost reckless refusal to accept limits, and a healthy disregard for conventional wisdom, had steadily worn him down. "Think of it as a needle," she'd argued during a particularly heated debate in the cramped engineering bay, the metallic tang of synthetic coffee thick in the stale air, the hum of diagnostic tools a restless background noise. "We're not trying to bash down brick wall with a sledgehammer. We're trying to thread a needle through a tapestry so vast it defies imagination." Kalin, a man whose patience was as thin as his graying hair, had scoffed, running a hand over his bald patch, the gesture one of profound frustration. "And if the needle snaps, Commander, or if the tapestry, which we understand less than a child understands quantum physics, unravels us?" The unspoken fear hung heavy, a palpable presence in the room, being unraveled into subatomic dust scattered across an unknowable void. Eris had just met his gaze, her own eyes unwavering, holding a truth so stark it silenced him. "Then we'll know, won't we, Doctor? We will have pushed the absolute edge, and the universe will have given us its answer." That grim determination, a blend of scientific curiosity and sheer human stubbornness, had swayed the Funding Council, a desperate gamble, by a civilization weary of its gilded cage. Yearning for answers, the Stargazer, their exploratory vessel, a ship that had once been destined for distant, mundane mapping missions, was retrofitted with the experimental drive, a pulsating core of condensed exotic matter humming at its heart, a hungry beast contained within reinforced plating. Its energy demands were astronomical, pushing the ship's primary reactors and auxiliary cells to their absolute screaming limit. The risk was not just catastrophic system failure, not just implosion, or being vaporized by the energies involved. Worse was the terror of being stranded, half-faced, existing in some impossible state within the quantum foam of what lay beyond the veil, an eternal ghost in a non-existent machine. The day of the breach was unnervingly quiet. No frantic chatter, no nervous laughter echoed on the bridge. only the low thrum of the ship's engines and the rhythmic thump-thump of Eris' own heart against her ribs. She sat in the command chair, strapped in, her fingers gripping the armrests until her knuckles were stark white. The blood drained from them. The main view screen displayed the veil, an undulating, inky blackness that seemed to absorb all light, all hope, all certainty. It was a wall of nothingness that had defined their existence, a cosmic barrier they were about to tear open. Initiating phase sequence alpha. Ilara's voice was steady, a stark contrast to the tremor Eris felt deep in her own hands. Energy conduit cycling to main drive. A deep resonance began to vibrate through the deck plates, a growl that intensified, rising in pitch until it was a piercing hum that seemed to penetrate the very marrow of their bones. Lights flickered on the console, then dimmed, momentarily struggling against the immense power drain, like a dying star. Aris tasted copper in her mouth, metallic and sharp. Her stomach lurched, a sickening twist. It felt like the ship was being torn apart from the inside, slowly, deliberately, molecule by agonizing molecule. A wave of pressure slammed against them, a physical force that pinned them to their seats, squeezing the air from their lungs. The world outside the viewport warped, colors bleeding into impossible hues, stars streaking into impossible lines. A silent, cosmic scream. It was a kaleidoscope of violence, a silent scream of reality being bent and broken. Then, a blinding flash, pure white, searing. A sudden, profound silence descended, not merely quiet, but an absolute vacuum of sound and thought. And then, a wrenching lurch that threw Eris against her restraints, snapping her head back. When her vision cleared, the kaleidoscope was gone. The inky blackness of the veil had vanished. In its place, a different kind of darkness stretched before them, one filled with unfamiliar constellations, ancient and cold, like forgotten eyes. And directly ahead, filling half the view screen, casting an enormous shadow, loomed a monstrous shape, a derelict. It was colossal, easily 100 times the size of the Stargazer, dwarfing their vessel. Its metallic skin, pitted and scarred by millennia of micrometeoroid impacts, reflected no light, absorbing it all into its silent vastness. It simply was a silent leviathan drifting in the deep dark, a ghost ship on a cosmic sea. Jagged broken antennae jutted from its superstructure like snapped bones, reaching out for something long gone. Gaps in its hull revealed vast, lightless chasms within, promising deeper mysteries. It was a skeletal hand reaching out from a forgotten tomb. "Scans Ilara," Eris managed, her voice hoarse, her throat dry, her heart still thudding against her ribs. "Anything? No power signatures," Ilara reported, her own awe thinly veiled, a tremor in her voice. "No life signs. Just a lot of mass, an incredible age, beyond anything we've ever dated with our current instruments." The Stargazer approached cautiously, her thrusters kicking up faint plumes of exhaust against the backdrop of alien stars, her movement almost imperceptible against the titanic scale of the derelict. Eris felt a prickle on her skin, a shiver that had nothing to do with the recycled air. This wasn't just a discovery. It was an intrusion. They were venturing into a tomb, and who knew what guardians still lingered, or what ghosts haunted its silent, suffocating halls. A small team, including Eris and Ilara, suited up, their movements stiff in the pressurized suits. The airlock hissed, cycling them through, a final barrier between them and the unknown. The external vacuum was absolute, silent, broken only by the faint clink of their magnetic boots on the hull as they maneuvered towards a breached hangar bay. The entrance yawned. A gaping maw in the station's side, a silent invitation to an ancient horror. Inside, the air was stagnant, cold, carrying a faint, indescribable odor. Something metallic, something ancient and vegetal, like dried leaves pressed between forgotten pages of a long-dead book. Their headlamps cut through the oppressive darkness, illuminating vast spaces, skeletal gantries and colossal, inert machinery. Dust, thick as velvet, coated everything, muffling their every movement. It was like walking into a cathedral built by giants, abandoned mid-prayer, its silent echoes stretching into eternity. Each step echoed, absorbed by the sheer volume of the space, swallowed by the profound silence. "Amazing," muttered Jax, their engineering specialist, his voice tinny in Aris's comms. A faint note of wonder. The scale of this. It's mind-boggling. What could build something like this? Aris didn't respond, her gaze sweeping across the cavernous bay, a profound sense of unease settling over her. This wasn't human engineering. This was something else entirely. Something vast, something old, something that had built a prison around them all. They spent hours navigating the silent corridors, the station's internal geometry, disorienting an alien, designed for beings of a different scale and comprehension. Then, in what appeared to be a command center, half collapsed but remarkably preserved, they found it. A crystalline console, fractured but still glowing with a faint internal light, like a dying ember. It pulsed with the same repeating anomaly signal that had drawn them across the veil. A beacon in the void. "This is it," Alara breathed, her fingers hovering, hesitant, over the alien interface, as if afraid to touch it. Aris nodded, her heart hammering against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat. "Be careful." They worked for what felt like an eternity, Jax painstakingly rerouting power from their suit's reserves. Alara attempting to bridge the data streams with their ship's universal translator, their breath misting in the cold air. Finally, a section of the console flared, displaying glyphs that twisted and flowed, then resolved into a language their translator recognized, an ancient pan-galactic tongue last seen in the fragmented archives of pre-veil transmissions. The logs began to scroll. They weren't direct messages, but snippets, diary entries, scientific observations, desperate pleas, all flowing from the ancient console. Images flickered. Star charts unlike any they knew. Vast, intricate diagrams of cosmic architecture, symbols of a proud, vibrant civilization that had once held sway over forgotten galaxies. And then, the horror began to unfold, chilling them to the bone. The logs detailed a meticulous, chilling account of another species, millennia ago, who had also stumbled upon the veil. They called it the Great Silence, then the web, then the ensnarement. They too had tried to pierce it, to map its insidious reach, sending out their own probes and ships, just as humanity had. Their recordings showed expeditions that vanished, probes that never returned, leaving behind only static, echoing humanity's own failures. Their scientists, much like Aris's own team, had hypothesized a barrier, a cosmic quarantine, a wall they could not see. But these logs went further, much further, into a terrifying abyss of understanding. They spoke of patterns, not random cosmic phenomena, but deliberate design, a grand, meticulous architecture. They showed simulations of the veil's intricate, non-Euclidean geometry, proving it was not a natural construct, but something carefully, purposefully woven. "The architect," Eris read aloud, her voice barely a whisper, translating the text from the console's glowing display. "They called it the architect." Alara flinched, a sharp intake of breath, her eyes wide with dawning horror. The log spoke of an entity, or perhaps a collective consciousness, of immense inconceivable power, older than stars, vaster than galaxies. Not a god, but a consciousness so vast, so ancient, that it transcended conventional life, transcended mere physical form. It had not merely built the prison. It was the prison, its will woven into the very fabric of the cosmos around them, an invisible, all-encompassing net. Its reach was not physical, but existential. It was not a lock and key, but a thought made manifest, a cosmic dream turned into a nightmare. The final entry in the log was a single, stark image, a representation of the veil, not as a wall, but as an enormous, infinitely complex neural network, pulsating with cold, indifferent light, and at its very heart, a single, all-encompassing node, the source of all, a mind, a singular, immense consciousness. "It doesn't just hold us here," Eris murmured, the cold dread seeping into her bones, chilling her to the core, more profound than the vacuum of space. Her vision blurred, not from tears, but from the sheer crushing weight of the revelation, of the truth. "It knows we're here. It always has. And now," she paused, her voice cracking, "it knows we found this." The silence of the derelict station pressed in, no longer just the absence of sound, but the palpable presence of an unimaginable, unseen warden, watching, waiting forever, its attention now drawn to them. The whispers, the ghost signals, the distant echoes of other species. They weren't just trapped with them. They were trapped inside something that was fundamentally alive, a sentient cage, and it had just become aware of them. The air in the observation chamber tasted of ozone and recycled despair. Dr. Eris Thorne traced a bead of condensation down his lukewarm mug, his eyes fixed on the primary holographic projection. For 6 cycles, they had been sifting through the galactic equivalent of ancient voicemail. Faint, fractured transmissions from civilizations long extinguished. Each click of his worn keyboard was a dull thud in the suffocating silence. Alara Vance, perched on a stool beside him, ran a hand through her short, practical hair. Her fingers danced across her own console, calling up fresh data streams, her face illuminated by the sickly green glow of alien script. She hummed a tuneless, anxious melody under her breath. "Anything, Alara?" Eris asked, his voice raspy. He hadn't truly slept in days, the lines on his face etched deeper than before. "Just more fragmented theories on cosmic expansion, Doctor," she replied, her voice taut with exhaustion. "And another 100,000 pages of astronomical charts, none of which seem to reconcile with our current models." A sigh escaped Eris, a sound heavy with the weight of generations. "Keep digging. There's something in these older layers, something deliberate about the inconsistencies." He leaned back, the ancient ergonomic chair groaning in protest. The room, usually a bustling hub of intellectual curiosity, felt like a tomb tonight. The only sounds were the incessant whirring of the processors, Alira's soft humming, and the drip of condensation. Hours bled into an indistinguishable haze. Eris felt his eyelids grow heavy, the edges of his vision blurring. He was about to suggest a break when Alara let out a sharp gasp. "Doctor, look!" Her finger jabbed at the main projection. A new data stream, an ancient language they'd only just begun to parse, was resolving itself. Not a theory, not a chart, but a direct narrative. A log entry. The previously abstract star maps on the display began to shift. Swathes of the galaxy, the Milky Way's habitable zone, coalesced into a single impossible structure. It wasn't a nebula. It wasn't a stellar cluster. It was a shell. A colossal, intricate web of constructs, a lattice work of unimaginable scale. It pulsed with a faint internal light like a living organism. "What in the void is that?" Aris whispered, his tiredness forgotten, a sudden knot tightening in his stomach. Ilara's voice was barely audible. "The log refers to it as the Keeper. No, wait, the Warden. Or the Guardian." She furiously typed, cross-referencing lexicon entries, her breath catching in her throat. "It describes it as the enclosing hand. A Dyson sphere-like construct, Doctor. But not around a single star. Around everything. Our entire sector." A cold dread began to seep into Aris's bones, colder than the recycled air. The projection zoomed in, showing intricate details. Colossal energy conduits, automated repair drones, the size of small moons, and observation ports that seemed to gaze inward, directly at them. It wasn't a natural phenomenon. It wasn't a natural phenomenon. Commander Kalen entered the chamber then, her presence usually a solid anchor in any crisis, but now her face was etched with a grim curiosity. She had likely been monitoring their progress from the command center. She moved with a silent, heavy tread, her gaze sweeping from their terrified faces to the unfolding horror on the screen. "Report, Dr. Thorne," she commanded, her voice low. But the usual edge of authority was muted, replaced by a tremor he'd never heard before. "Commander, we found the prison walls," Aris managed, his throat dry. He pointed to the screen where the ancient log continued to translate. The language was less clinical now, more desperate, emotional. It spoke of a purpose. Ilara, recovering her composure, began to read aloud, her voice strained. It was built not of hatred but of fear. Not to trap us, but to shelter. The great silence is a shield, forged in the terror of what lies beyond. Aris felt a jolt of ice water through his veins. "Beyond?" he echoed, his eyes widening. The screen zoomed out again, showing the colossal warden enclosing their galactic region. Then, with a slow, deliberate animation, it peeled back a hypothetical segment of the construct, revealing the utter darkness that lay just beyond its outer shell. The log projected ancient, crude schematics of something vast, amorphous, and utterly indifferent. It was not a civilization. It was not a rival species. It was something formless, consuming, and ancient beyond comprehension. The log descriptions were terrifying in their vagueness. The hungry void, the unmaking breath, the static that devours. It spoke of entire galaxies being swallowed whole, of fundamental laws of physics bending and breaking in its presence. Kalen braced herself against a console, her knuckles white against the metal. Her usual stoicism had cracked, revealing a deep-seated terror. "They built this cage," she whispered, her voice barely a breath. "Not to keep us in," Aris finished, a profound, crushing sadness settling over him, "but to keep it out." The narrative continued, revealing generations of civilizations, sacrificing themselves, pooling their unimaginable resources and knowledge to create this protective barrier. It was the legacy of 1,000 species, all unified by a single, terrifying threat. They were not alone in their fear. They were simply the latest beneficiaries of a cosmic sacrifice. A different kind of silence fell in the chamber, heavier than before. The rhythmic hum of the machines seemed to mock their sudden, profound understanding. They weren't just trapped. They were preserved. The freedom they had yearned for, the vast, open cosmos they had dreamed of exploring, was not freedom at all. It was an illusion, a beautiful lie. Their prison was a gift, a desperate act of love and terror from forgotten hands. Ilara slowly rose from her stool, her eyes wide, unfocused. She looked at the projection, at the vast, silent shell that had defined their existence without them ever knowing. All this time, she breathed, her voice cracking. We curse the void for its silence, never realizing the silence itself was a scream. Aris nodded, a single, bitter tear tracing a path through the grime on his cheek. The whispers from beyond the prison walls were not the calls of friends, but the hungry gurgle of something truly ancient, truly terrifying. They were not just stuck. They were sheltered, and the cost of that shelter was the truth of their galactic solitude. The stars above, now, felt less like distant dreams and more like the glinting bars of a cosmic cell. The air in the observation chamber tasted of ozone and recycled despair. Dr. Eris Thorne traced a bead of condensation down his lukewarm mug, his eyes fixed on the primary holographic projection. For 6 cycles, they had been sifting through the galactic equivalent of ancient voicemail. Faint, fractured transmissions from civilizations long extinguished. Each click of his worn keyboard was a dull thud in the suffocating silence. Ilara Vance, perched on a stool beside him, ran a hand through her short, practical hair. Her fingers danced across her own console, calling up fresh data streams, her face illuminated by the sickly green glow of alien script. She hummed a tuneless, anxious melody under her breath. "Anything, Ilara?" Aris asked, his voice raspy. He hadn't truly slept in days, the lines on his face etched deeper than before. "Just more fragmented theories on cosmic expansion, Doctor," she replied, her voice taut with exhaustion. "And another 100,000 pages of astronomical charts, none of which seem to reconcile with our current models." A sigh escaped Eris, a sound heavy with the weight of generations. "Keep digging. There's something in these older layers, something deliberate about the inconsistencies." He leaned back, the ancient ergonomic chair groaning in protest. The room, usually a bustling hub of intellectual curiosity, felt like a tomb tonight. The only sounds were the incessant whirring of the processors, Ilara's soft humming, and the drip of condensation. Hours bled into an indistinguishable haze. Aris felt his eyelids grow heavy, the edges of his vision blurring. He was about to suggest a break when Ilara let out a sharp gasp. "Doctor, look!" Her finger jabbed at the main projection. A new data stream, an ancient language they'd only just begun to parse, was resolving itself. Not a theory, not a chart, but a direct narrative. A log entry. The previously abstract star maps on the display began to shift. Swathes of the galaxy, the Milky Way's habitable zone, coalesced into a single impossible structure. It wasn't a nebula. It wasn't a stellar cluster. It was a shell. A colossal, intricate web of constructs. A latticework of unimaginable scale. It pulsed with a faint, internal light, like a living organism. What in the void is that? Aris whispered, his tiredness forgotten. A sudden knot tightening in his stomach. Alaris' voice was barely audible. The log refers to it as... No, wait, the Warden. Or the Guardian. She furiously typed, cross-referencing lexicon entries, her breath catching in her throat. It describes it as the enclosing hand, a Dyson sphere-like construct, Doctor, but not around a single star, around everything, our entire sector. A cold dread began to seep into Aris's bones, colder than the recycled air. The projection zoomed in, showing intricate details, colossal energy conduits, automated repair drones, the size of small moons, and observation ports that seemed to gaze inward, directly at them. It wasn't a natural phenomenon. It was engineered. Commander Kalen entered the chamber then, her presence usually a solid anchor in any crisis. But now her face was etched with a grim curiosity. She had likely been monitoring their progress from the command center. She moved with a silent, heavy tread, her gaze sweeping from their terrified faces to the unfolding horror on the screen. "Report, Dr. Thorne," she commanded, her voice low, but the usual edge of authority was muted, replaced by a tremor he'd never heard before. "Commander, we've found the prison walls." Aris managed, his throat dry. He pointed to the screen, where the ancient log continued to translate. The language was less clinical now, more desperate, emotional. It spoke of a purpose. Ilara, recovering her composure, began to read aloud, her voice strained. It was built not of hatred, but of fear. Not to trap us, but to shelter. The great silence is a shield, forged in the terror of what lies beyond. Aris felt a jolt of ice water through his veins. "Beyond?" he echoed, his eyes widening. The screen zoomed out again, showing the colossal Warden enclosing their galactic region. Then, with a slow, deliberate animation, it peeled back a hypothetical segment of the construct, revealing the utter darkness that lay just beyond its outer shell. The log projected ancient, crude schematics of something vast, amorphous, and utterly indifferent. It was not a civilization. It was not a rival species. It was something formless, consuming, and ancient, beyond comprehension. The log descriptions were terrifying in their vagueness. The hungry void, the unmaking breath, the static that devours. It spoke of entire galaxies being swallowed whole, of fundamental laws of physics bending and breaking in its presence. Kalen braced herself against a console, her knuckles white against the metal. Her usual stoicism had cracked, revealing a deep-seated terror. "They built this cage," she whispered, her voice barely a breath. "Not to keep us in," Aris finished, a profound, crushing sadness settling over him, "but to keep it out." The narrative continued, revealing generations of civilizations sacrificing themselves, pooling their unimaginable resources and knowledge to create this protective barrier. It was the legacy of 1,000 species, all unified by a single terrifying threat. They were not alone in their fear. They were simply the latest beneficiaries of a cosmic sacrifice. A different kind of silence fell in the chamber, heavier than before. The rhythmic hum of the machines seemed to mock their sudden profound understanding. They weren't just trapped. They were preserved. The freedom they had yearned for, the vast open cosmos they had dreamed of exploring, was not freedom at all. It was an illusion, a beautiful lie. Their prison was a gift, a desperate act of love and terror from forgotten hands. Ilara slowly rose from her stool, her eyes wide, unfocused. She looked at the projection, at the vast, silent shell that had defined their existence without them ever knowing. "All this time," she breathed, her voice cracking, "we cursed the void for its silence, never realizing the silence itself was a scream." Aris nodded, a single bitter tear tracing a path through the grime on his cheek. The whispers from beyond the prison walls were not the calls of friends, but the hungry gurgle of something truly ancient, truly terrifying. They were not just stuck. They were sheltered, and the cost of that shelter was the truth of their galactic solitude. The stars above, now, felt less like distant dreams and more like the glinting bars of a cosmic cell. The stale air in the repurposed maintenance conduit tasted faintly of ozone and old dust, a perpetual hum vibrating beneath Eris's bare feet. He ran a hand over the rough-hewn surface of the console, his fingers tracing phantom lines in the grimy plastic. Outside the reinforced viewport, a simulated dawn painted the artificial sky in muted hues of rose and lavender, a gentle lie repeated every 16 hours. It was the warden's way, a benevolent hand guiding their existence within this gilded cage. But benevolence, Aris knew, could be the most absolute form of control. He could feel the weight of it, a silent pressure in his chest, a constant echo of his confinement. Every system, every resource, every whispered communication was catalogued, processed, understood. There was no true privacy here, only degrees of unobserved defiance. And their current defiance, this desperate search for a flaw, felt like chipping away at a mountain with a spoon. "Anything, Elara?" Eris asked, his voice low, almost swallowed by the ambient hum. He didn't turn from the viewport. The simulated sunrise felt like a mockery today. Elara hunched over a flickering terminal across the cramped space, merely grunted. Her dark hair, usually meticulously braided, had escaped its confines, framing a face smudged with grease and exhaustion. Empty nutrient packs lay crumpled beside her, testament to hours, if not days, spent in this cramped, airless space. Her fingers danced across the holographic interface, a blur of motion only she could follow. Jax, sprawled on a collapsible cot with a datapad propped on his chest, pushed himself upright. He rubbed his eyes, the red rims stark against his pale skin. "Just more closed loops." "Eris," he said, his voice raspy from lack of use. "Every protocol leads back to a core directive. Preserve, protect, contain. It's elegant. It's maddening." He tossed the pad onto the cot, the plastic clattering softly. "It's like trying to find a misstep in a perfectly executed waltz." Eris finally turned, his gaze sweeping over the two faces that held his hope. They were tired, yes, but their eyes still burned with a stubborn refusal to yield. He saw his own desperation reflected there, magnified. "There has to be an oversight," Eris insisted, moving to a holographic display that projected the warden's vast, interconnected network as a shimmering, impossible neural web. "No system, however ancient, however benevolent, is truly perfect." "Benevolent for whom?" Elara muttered, her voice sharp with a frustration that bordered on despair. "It feels benevolent because it gives us food, shelter, simulated sunlight. But it hasn't let a single ship leave this sector in 300 cycles, Aris. Not one." A bitter laugh escaped her lips. "It's a 5-star prison, nothing more. And it's been running longer than our species has had spaceflight," Jax added, leaning forward, his earlier fatigue momentarily forgotten. "The original architects of this place, whoever they were, built something truly monumental. Eris nodded, his jaw tight. That was the crux of it. The warden wasn't just their jailer. It was an ancient construct, a relic that predated their own civilization's awareness of other intelligences. It had been here, a silent, unblinking sentinel, long before their ancestors first dared to look beyond their homeworld. The faint ghost signals of other species, the cosmic whispers of the stuck, they all pointed to the warden as the common denominator. Keep digging, Ilara, Aris urged. We need to look past the surface protocols, past the obvious layers of preservation. Think about what this system was designed to do, initially. Before us, before anyone we know. Ilara didn't respond directly, her focus narrowing to a specific cluster of data streams. A minute later, a low whistle escaped her lips. Huh? Dax. Jax immediately sat up, leaning over her shoulder. What is it? An anomalous energy signature. Ilara explained, her fingers working with renewed urgency. It's faint, almost imperceptible, buried under layers of routine power fluctuations. But it's not part of the standard preserve, protect, contain matrix. She isolated the signature, projecting it onto a smaller screen. It pulsed erratically, a tiny, sickly green flicker against the blue of the network map. It's like a defunct relay, a dead-end protocol, but it's still drawing a microscopic amount of power. Why would the warden's system maintain a ghost process? Eris stepped closer, his heart thudding a slow, heavy rhythm against his ribs. This was it. This felt different. He could feel it in the prickle of anticipation crawling up his arms. Can you trace its origin? Ilara's brows furrowed in concentration. It's deep, very deep, beneath the core containment directives. Very deep, almost like a foundational layer that's been deactivated but not purged. She pulled up schematic after schematic, overlaying them onto the pulsating green dot. It points to a structural anomaly in the outermost ring of the system, a section designated tertiary containment that's listed as inert. Jax pointed at the screen. Inert? That whole sector is supposed to be solid. Aris, no entry points, no external access beyond emergency power conduits. It's part of the outer wall of our entire sector. Exactly, Ilara said, her eyes gleaming with a sudden, wild excitement. But this signature, it's radiating from within that inert structure. And it's not a malfunction. It's a deliberate design choice. She typed furiously, her voice picking up speed. It's a dormant access point, a hidden conduit, a backdoor. A tense silence fell over the small conduit. The word hung in the air, heavy with unspoken possibility. A backdoor, an escape. Show me the full schematic, Aris commanded, his voice barely a whisper, a stark contrast to the thundering hope now blossoming in his chest. Trace its purpose. Ilara brought up an ancient, intricate blueprint. The green flicker now highlighted a hidden passage, a labyrinthine path that snaked through the impenetrable tertiary containment sector, bypassing every known security protocol of the warden. It was an access point to the outside, a way out. Then, the blueprint shifted. As Ilara delved deeper, the lines around the back door began to change, forming a distinct symbol Aris recognized from the fragments of ancient broadcasts they'd intercepted, a symbol associated with containment protocols for objects of immense, unstable energy. And beside it, in a script so old it was almost indecipherable, appeared a single phrase. Ilara translated it aloud, her voice losing its excitement, replaced by a growing tremor of horror. Emergency containment release for the Echo. Her eyes widened, meeting Eris's. It's not for us. It's not an escape hatch. It's a failsafe, a release valve. Her breath hitched. This back door, it wasn't built to let us out. It was built to let something else escape, should its primary containment fail. The warden's benevolent hum seemed to deepen, to take on a chilling, almost predatory quality. The silence in the conduit grew heavy, suffocating. The relief Aris had felt moments ago curdled into a cold, knotting dread, far worse than any despair he had known before. They weren't just trapped. They were trapped with something, and the only door out was actually a key to unleash an even greater horror. The galaxy outside wasn't just sealed off. It was being protected from whatever slumbered within these walls alongside them. Eris stared at the ancient script, his gaze fixed on the single ominous word, Echo. The gentle hum of the warden now sounded like a silent, watchful sigh. They hadn't found a weakness in their prison. They had merely discovered the terrifying truth of its purpose. The hum of the central console was the only steady rhythm in the room, a low thrum against the frantic beat of Aris Thorne's own heart. His fingers, calloused from years of circuit boards and star charts, hovered over the primary activation sequence. The air smelled of ozone and recycled coffee, a cloying blend that did nothing to calm the nerves fraying raw in his chest. Lena, her dark hair a wild halo around her pale face, stared fixedly at the auxiliary monitor, her lower lip caught between her teeth. She mumbled coordinates and parameters under her breath, a litany of numbers that represented their precarious plunge into the abyss. Kaito, ever the quiet anchor, adjusted a micro-optic array with meticulous care, his movements precise, almost serene, despite the monumental task before them. He didn't look at Aris, but Aris felt his gaze, a silent question about the cost of what they were about to do. Everything green on your end, Lena? Aris's voice came out rougher than he intended, a dry rasp. Green and blinking, Aris, she replied, her voice a thin wire pulled taut. No, not green, Lena, Kaito corrected, his tone calm, almost mournful. Everything is crimson. We're just choosing to ignore the warnings. Lena flinched, but didn't argue. Kaito wasn't wrong. The console itself glowed with a faint, angry red, where the system warnings flared like festering wounds. They were pushing the warden's limits, probing a vulnerability in its ancient, elegant prison, not to shatter it, but to bend it, just enough. A single hairline fracture in an otherwise impenetrable wall. The coordinates are locked, Arius announced, ignoring Kaito's truth. This is it. Last chance to abort. He didn't offer the option because he knew no one would take it. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. It was the silence of desperation, the silence of a species holding its breath, poised on the edge of a precipice. He looked at the holographic projection above the console, a swirling blue-tinted representation of their contained galaxy, a gilded cage they'd called home for millennia. Beyond its shimmering edge, the projection blurred into an indistinguishable, opaque gray, the theoretical void. But they knew better. They had glimpsed the ghost signals, heard the muffled echoes. It wasn't a void. It was a carnival just out of sight, and they were trapped in the dusty backstage. Sequence initiating, Lena breathed, her fingers dancing across her keyboard. A low, persistent hum intensified, vibrating through the soles of Aris' boots. The scent of ozone sharpened, making his eyes water. His stomach twisted, a cold knot of dread and exhilaration. He pressed the primary activation button. It clicked with a surprising lack of ceremony, a simple mechanical sound that belied the cosmic implications. A ripple of energy pulsed from the console, spreading outwards, not just within the room, but across the holographic galaxy. The blue field shimmered violently, like water struck by a sudden gale. A high-pitched whine began, searing through the air. It wasn't just a sound, it was a physical pressure against their eardrums, vibrating in their teeth. The lights in the lab flickered, then dimmed to a sickly yellow, casting long, dancing shadows. On the main screen, the warden's containment field, typically depicted as an unyielding barrier, began to distort. A fault line, impossibly thin, appeared at their calculated breach point, a hairline crack in the celestial glass. It glowed with an unsettling, raw violet light. Power fluctuations stabilizing, Lena yelled over the din, her voice strained. "We have integrity." For now, Aris watched, mesmerized and terrified. The violet crack widened, not exploding, but stretching, pulling apart with agonizing slowness. It was like tearing silk, except this silk was reality itself. Through the growing aperture, the opaque gray of the projected void began to shift. It wasn't darkness. It was a chaos of colors, a kaleidoscopic nightmare of swirling nebulae and incandescent light, so vibrant, so overwhelming, it assaulted the senses even through the monitor. Stars weren't pinpricks of light. They were colossal, churning furnaces, their cosmic breath visible as shimmering plumes of gas and dust. And beyond them, beyond anything their instruments had ever even hinted at, was a vastness that was both exhilarating and profoundly horrifying. "What in?" Kaito whispered, abandoning his stoic facade. His hand flew to his mouth, his eyes wide with a mixture of awe and terror. The air in the lab grew frigid, a sudden drop in temperature that stole their breath. A strange metallic tang filled their mouths, sharp and alien. Then came the sound. It wasn't a roar or a shriek, but a low, resonant thrum, like the deep pulse of some impossibly large, ancient heart. It was a sound that didn't resonate in their ears, but in their bones, a fundamental vibration of the universe itself. Through the breach, now a gaping raw maw of swirling energy, something shifted. Not an object, not a creature, but a presence. It was formless, yet undeniable, an instantaneous impression of vast, indifferent intelligence, utterly alien, utterly powerful. A shadow, not of darkness, but of unfathomable light, flickered at the edge of the breach, then seemed to move. "The breach is destabilizing," Lena shrieked, her fingers flying across her console, trying to compensate. "Something's pulling at it. It's not just a window. Aris. It's a door." The console blared a series of critical alerts. The violet light intensified, bathing the room in its unnerving glow. The air became thick, heavy, like trying to breathe underwater. The warden's response was not destructive, but invasive. It was trying to heal the wound, but the raw universe outside was pushing back, holding it open. And then something passed through. It wasn't a physical entity in the way they understood it. It was a ripple, a shockwave of information, a burst of incomprehensible data that flooded their systems, overloading sensors, screaming through their processors. The lab's internal lights exploded in showers of sparks, plunging them into near darkness, illuminated only by the frantic violet glow of the breach and the dying embers of their consoles. Aris stumbled back, his head suddenly aching, filled with a cacophony of unheard voices, of distant star song, of mathematical equations that tore at the fabric of his understanding. It was too much, too fast, too alien. He felt the universe not just outside, but inside him, for one unbearable moment. Then, just as suddenly, the intense sensory assault subsided, leaving behind a profound ringing in his ears and a sense of utter disorientation. The breach, still gaping, had stabilized. It pulsed with a contained, violet energy, a temporary wound in reality, holding steady. But what had passed through? On the main screen, now flickering erratically, a new icon appeared. Not a ship, not a signal, but a complex, constantly shifting geometric pattern, pulsing with a faint, internal light. It hovered, impossibly, within their contained galaxy, not constrained by the Warden's rules, a ghost in the machine. It was an unknown cosmic variable, an entity or phenomenon they had unknowingly invited in. Kaito slowly raised his head, his face pale, his eyes fixed on the screen. "We did it," he whispered, his voice hollow. "We broke out." Lena slumped against her console, her shoulders shaking, a laugh escaping her lips, high and brittle, bordering on a sob. "And now? Now we're free." Harris stared at the violet tear in the sky, at the terrifying beautiful chaos beyond, and then at the alien pattern, now humming silently within their own sphere. Freedom. It felt less like a liberation, and more like a fall. They had opened the cage, but they had also stepped into a jungle far more dangerous, far more beautiful, and infinitely more unforgiving than they could have ever imagined. The silence that followed was not one of relief, but of a chilling, profound uncertainty. The whisper of the cosmos had turned into a roar, and they were utterly, devastatingly alone in it.